Hi, and welcome everybody. My name is Charles Creel, and I'd like to thank our sponsors and our hosts today in BIME and Shane Spiro for organizing an extraordinary event and letting us come here today and present this glorious panel who are going to talk to you about music and games and moving forward together, how we can work together, how we're not working well together, and then just generally what the developments are in the industry at the moment and where we seem to be going. Our guests are Paulina Bozek. Paulina is the CEO of Inensu, a startup studio developing social and mobile apps and platforms for the connected generation. Prior to founding Inensu, she was the development director of Atari London studio, and before that, Paulina spent 6 years at Sony as the executive producer of the SingStar franchise for PlayStation. SingStar has been instrumental in establishing games as popular entertainment and achieved over $500 million in revenue. Paulina started her career in games in 1999 at Ubisoft in Montreal, and in 2004, she was awarded the BAFTA Interactive New Talent Award. In 2005, SingStar was awarded the BAFTA Award for Originality. Let's welcome Paulina. Glad to have you here. We also have John Broomhall. Now, John has been around music for video games for over 20 years. He's the composer for classic games like Transport Tycoon and XCOM, and more recently composed music for key Xbox One launch title Forza Motorsport 5, which was recorded at George Lucas's Skywalker studio, which is amazing. His prolific career encompasses contributions to many other celebrated productions, a multifaceted independent music and audio creative with many years' experience in both the music and video games industries. He's held a number of senior in-house and outsourced management roles and has dozens of published titles to his credit as composer-producer, audio director consultant, sound effects designer, and voice director and game producer. Let's welcome John to the panel. We're also fortunate to have Tanya Laird with us today. Tanya has been working in the digital industry across entertainment, IP, and innovation for the last 10 years, working primarily with global gaming and entertainment franchises such as Star Wars, Marvel, and Moshi Monsters that have achieved BAFTA, Golden Joystick, developed Chartered Institute of Marketing, the Queen's Award for Enterprise Innovation, and Telly Awards, respectively. Tanya also provides mentoring and consultancy to new tech startups across a wide variety of business incubators and accelerators, including Wayra Unlimited, Oxygen Accelerator out of Google Campus, the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, and the School of Communication Arts 2.0. Tanya, welcome to the panel. And finally, Martin Hewitt. Martin is music licensing manager at Sony Computer Entertainment Europe Limited and works on the A&R and acquisition of licensed music and commissioned music for all the game titles produced by SCEE. These innovative and award-winning games include SingStar, Little Big Planet, Wipeout, Gran Turismo, and Killzone. Welcome. So I'd like to start by touching on this theme of moving forward together. Are we really moving forward together? How is this working between the games industry and the music industry? Would you like to talk about that? Start with that, Martin.
I guess it depends what you mean by moving forward together. I mean, games often need music, so how they use the music kind of depends on the type of music you go for. So a game like SingStar, we need the music industry because we need those big hits to make the game work. So we work closely with lots of people to get those songs. Other titles, such as Little Big Planet, are a bit more open in the choice of music you use, but also they kind of involve getting more under the hood with the music. So we do work closely with the music industry. So we do work together, but I think there's always room to kind of collaborate further and interact further.
And do you think that Pauline, do you think that is the case particularly around music that you're licensing in, or does that change when you're commissioning original music?
Well, my work is predominantly around games where music is generally the main event. You're playing with the tracks or playing with the music, or in some cases, not necessarily manipulating the music, but the music is the sort of self-expression and identification of the audience that I'm trying, or the game is trying to attract, or the app. And in some ways, I think, there's a lot of advantages to working with music as a game developer, app creator. I mean, it's tremendously powerful in creating an audience. I mean, it comes with a ready-built audience. At the same time, it's can be very difficult to work with the music industry, and just in terms of the structured industry of the licensing and that kind of thing, and going through those motions. So there is, there's different aspects to it. I mean, when you are using tracks as fundamentally to your experience, then you must have the music. And in most cases, you need to have the authentic music, because it's not just about manipulating sound. It's about kind of engaging and experiencing all the attributes around the music, the emotional connection, the community, the social aspects, and all of that.
Which makes perfect sense, because music, and pop music particularly, is often indexical to different kinds of crowds that you might be dealing with, and so inherently the audience might come in. John, you're writing original music. How is that experience different for you in terms of the way that you look at the games industry and the music industry and how they might be working together?
Hi, everyone. So the first thing I just wanted to say was that, I mean, it doesn't seem that long ago when there was a kind of pretty healthy distrust between the games industry and the music industry. And I remember, quite a few years ago, but wanting to license music into games and actually encountering quite a lot of skepticism. And basically, I guess, ignorance on both sides about what each other need out of this. And I think that's obviously changed a huge amount. Games culture has become ubiquitous. We now, I guess a lot of people working in the music industry have grown up playing games. So I think the general kind of atmosphere of what's going on between the games industry and the music industry, it's greatly improved compared to the earlier days of video games. With original music, can you just remind me of your question? Because I've just talked myself out of it.
Well, I'm curious about,
what's
in
different?
moving forward together, how that's working when you're doing original composition.
So clearly a lot of composers are being commissioned who you don't necessarily think of as composers for games. So we've got film composers, TV composers, and artists as well being asked to contribute original music for games. But there are some key differences that you need to be aware of if you're wanting to write music for games. I mean, first of all, games are an interactive medium. That's a very obvious thing to say, but you don't through compose music for games necessarily, so you have to think about how music is delivered in a game. There's a kind of desire in a lot of games to be so-called cinematic with the approach to the delivery of music. Therefore, you want it to kind of respond to the player's actions and the events in the game somewhat like a film. But that's problematic because you don't know exactly how long a scene is going to last. You don't know when the player is going to do a certain thing. So you've got indeterminacy of actions. It's very hard to kind of get trajectory into the music if you don't know when the thing is going to happen. And the other thing is that you've got a lot of ground to cover in a game. You think about how long people might play a AAA console game for, 15, 20 hours. So, the music has a lot of ground to cover potentially. That means you're looking for ways to extend it. So without drilling down too deep, unless you want me to, maybe you want to come back to that. But I think for people who don't know about games, who want to create original music for games, be that a band or a composer for another entertainment format, then knowing about interactive music, understanding interactive music tools, is a pretty big deal, and understanding the nature of the medium and how music can serve it, which is not shoehorning the grammar of film music into games.
So let me drill into that a little bit further just on the creative side. where music is traditionally based on tension and release, how do you then deal with that when you're dealing with indeterminate amounts of time? How you end up building?
Okay, I have to give you a short answer to that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be here all day. But
Yes.
I mean, because it is a subject in itself, and Game Music Connect, that's something we discuss a lot about the purpose and meaning of music applied to interactive experiences. And especially with, I guess maybe we'll talk about it later, but VR heightens some of those issues even more. What is music for and all of that? So in terms of delivering music, the short answer to your question is having schemes and strategies and technologies that enable you to deliver the music in segmented and layered form, kind of in bits, in a kit part, to sustain scenes that need sustaining, and to deliver the moment when it happens. And a great example of how that's been done very successfully recently is in the BAFTA award-winning Alien Isolation, where they have done a pretty good job of doing something that's very hard in games, which is sort of heralding events. So without drilling down too deep, yes, there are different issues that face a composer of original music for games, and those are things that you need to get to grips with. So moving forward together, that's part of it, education and understanding of what this particular medium needs, which is not just necessarily shoehorning linear music in, even when it comes to licensed music.
Right. So, Tanya, this brings up an interesting question in that this is an extraordinary skill set that someone would have to have in order to pull off this kind of work. That skill set must get very expensive after a while, and studios surely must have a response to that.
When you say expensive after a while, I mean fundamentally the kind of music that John is talking about is something that you do in-house.
Yeah.
It's not something you're going to outsource, and you're not going to necessarily consult unless it is a flagship musician who's typically a film composer. Then that might be different, and you'd happily pay the bucks for somebody like that to come to the game. But a lot of this talent is stuff that would be cultivated in-house, because the types of techniques we're talking about and being able to literally, writing for game is not the same as writing for music, where you can generalistically allow the themes to come to you and kind of grow around that music. With gaming, you're literally churning out music all of the time, and you're reworking themes, and you're applying those themes to different chunks of the game to see whether or not they're going to work. And so you're always evolving from an audio perspective. But as well, the other thing that we haven't mentioned here in terms of music and gaming is also working with the audio team as a whole, and the soundscaping that needs to happen around that music. And that's a particular set of skills and a particular communication kind of language that you need to have as well. That it's not something that somebody who necessarily traditionally writes for film or for just pop music, for example, will necessarily have those skill sets. It's definitely something that comes with a certain degree of experience and a certain degree of interaction with studios to know how you're going to go about that and how you're going to take that into consideration. And John mentions, a great example right now is VR. Writing music for VR is not as straightforward as saying, hey, you know what, there's a perfect piece of licensed music, let me chuck this into this VR experience. It's actually about understanding the mechanics of binaural sound and how we're going to direct people with music or with audio landscaping, because you're in a 360-degree environment, and you can no longer use the traditional director method of a cut here or an edit there or a zoom in there, because they don't work in 360-degree. So you're relying entirely upon the sound and visual to make that happen. So it's a completely different skill set. Does that answer your question?
That it well, and so incredibly new skills that have to be brought on board, and having a rapport with the broad team, which becomes really important. Multi-layering of sound, which is very different than the tradition. I mean, Paulina, how does technology always changes what it contains? And it has certainly done that to music in the way that the introduction of the microphone changed song structure. How are games changing music in general, both within games and without?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting sort of connections between music and games, or music and technology in general. I think it's everybody at this conference, is experiencing the vast changes in the music industry. And we all are living through shifts from owning things to accessing things, owning music to accessing music through subscriptions and streaming models. And that's a very big shift. And of course, it's totally, turned things upside down in terms of monetization and revenue and economics of everything. I think what makes what game and app and technology creators, what is really interesting is we focus on the user interface to the music. I think the relationship between people and music doesn't change, and the fact that they love music and they're passionate about music and music inspires and, all those things. I think what technology and creators can focus on the user interface and create completely different experiences, which then lead on to new revenue models. I mean, just looking at apps and games, you have so many different possibilities. You have the creative aspects, tools to create, easy creation aspects, sampling and mixing, like the Pacemaker DJ app on the iPhone, has a really slick, beautiful interface. It's really easy to use. It reinvents that genre. You've even got the Kim Kardashian game, not something we would talk about as a highbrow music game, but she's not even a musician, but it's just dipping a toe into that whole pop culture and celebrity aspect that I think is part of music and music culture. And we have, a whole bunch of other things. I mean, obviously the peripherals, the Guitar Heroes, bringing that experience back right now, relaunching it. There are just so many different user interfaces that technology and apps and games can bring to the table with music to transform how we engage with it and open up new revenue opportunities and just totally new experiences.
So let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because you talked about Guitar Hero and other franchises like that. When the piece of music that is used is fundamental to the gameplay, it actually becomes a game mechanic in and of itself. How does that impact the way that you approach selection of materials for particular games?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge deal with SingStar, and it would be with Guitar Hero and the rock bands and all the other, even maybe. It's like Avicii Vector just announced, I think last night or the night before for PlayStation 4. When you are playing with the track, you have to break it down into the components and look at it as a level, perhaps. And it depends on what the actual mechanic is and what the experience is. In the SingStar case or in the rock band case, you're obviously looking for vocals, obviously looking for guitar, sections and things like that. That is going to make the experience enjoyable. I think there's also a certain amount of learning curve. I think there's a really big fundamental thing to realize, I think, creating any entertainment is that the vast majority of people are fans, not music creators. And so there is a big, you have to pay attention to making things simple and fun and introducing, musical concepts in an easy way that everybody can participate in. And so that also affects the sort of selection process. Even, simple things like language, localization is a huge deal, both in terms of language spoken and just the music that is popular in different countries. We always assume that American and British, English music is just reigns across the world, and that's not true. There are, really big homegrown talents that mean more to people here locally. So that factors into track selection. There's so much, and you just have to deconstruct it, depending on what you need. So I think there's a question. Well, you look at the standard. It's a little bit. Well, you could look at iTunes charts. You could look at radio charts, Spotify playlists, YouTube hits. You look at just the charts. I mean, you can. Also, there's a bit of even a personal touch. What you ask somebody what they grew up with in the 80s, what was popular, what's their equivalent of "Aha, Take on Me," in Spain. I don't know, but somebody here is going to know some nostalgic track that made sense. So we would look at the standard sort of charts, and now like the new charts in Spotify and things like that, and some on the ground knowledge.
You look like you have something you want to contribute to that.
I mean, just anecdotally, there's some really practical things about all of this as well. As well as original music, I've spent some time working on Guitar Hero and other games I won't bore you with lots of licensed music, and crossed paths with Martin more than once doing that. And, there are issues like, you start with your wish list for a game like B-Boy, where you want a load of great rare grooves and hip-hop tracks, what have you, and B-Boy anthems, and half of them are in litigation. Another example would be like the ball ache of say Guitar Hero stems. In that example, you actually have to get the original multi-track. some people don't even know where the thing is, So it's like trying to get that and then have it prepared in a format that then when I get hold of it, we can do the Guitar Hero work according to the Guitar Hero Bible, So there's a lot of practical things that affect track choice, that just lie behind the scenes people will never know about.
I think to sort of touch on something John said earlier about the change since I've been working in games and music is that we now are able to talk to the music industry and they understand what a game is and understand the concept. Often starting, say, with SingStar, you'd have to explain what it is. Okay, is it karaoke? It's not really karaoke. It's slightly different. Why do you need these assets? What's the idea behind it? And I think using stems is kind of an interesting problem. You touched on the very fact that there are lots of songs, lots of really, really big classic songs that the stems are gone.
So just for people who might not be technical musicians, can you talk about what stems are?
Stems might be like the vocal track, the guitar, bass, whatever the genre of music. I know the team at PlayStation spent a long time recreating some classic 80s songs and then getting those edits approved by Giorgio Moroder, for instance, which was quite hard. But each game kind of has a different kind of methodology behind it. So a game like Little Big Planet, we get composers to write music in different stems, like 6 different stems, which are effectively 6 different songs, so that then people can play the game and enjoy the game as a kind of story mode, but they can also then create their own level. So it's the user interaction, so it's like the UI thing you were mentioning. It's like how you use music, and that's a clever way of doing it rather than trying to get a licensed track, which the band are not very keen to have their song sort of messed around with because they view it as a piece of art, quite rightly. So musical solutions to games are kind of what tends to happen, and I think moving forward, now most kind of younger band managers are of a generation that grew up with games. Those opportunities can become sort of closely aligned, whereas previously technology would advance in the games industry and trying to sort of pull an old business model forward.
So not only an old business model, but an old method of working and an old way of looking at the whole form and format.
Yeah, and also kind of an old business model in terms of like the revenue they expect from a title. I mean, I've spent quite a long time explaining to people why they're getting X amount of money, not Y. And explaining the benefit not just in terms of finances, but also exposure to a new audience, a different audience, especially with evergreen artists, explaining why you probably want to get on this game because it will help you get a whole younger audience. I think when we did the first SingStar, I remember people took it home and played with their kids, and they were like, "Who's Elvis?" And they were like, when they were like, "Oh, Elvis is great," because they'd heard it. They don't hear those sorts of tracks, so I think that's something that's always worth bearing in mind when it regards to kind of hitting a new audience for a game.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the revenue models that exist out there and how those are changing and how people who are making music for games are changing their approach?
So I don't know as much about the syncing, and I'm not as familiar with the licensing end of that, so I'll leave that to Martin. But in terms of what independent musicians and kind of composers, actually any digital content creator now is really able to do, the places like Pond5, for example, there are people who make their entire living off places like Pond5 these days.
And can you explain Pond5 for people who might not know it?
Pond5 basically is a website where you can upload your content and have people license that for one-time use, for ongoing use, whatever it may be, and then people will come and they will use that, and they will either insert into their little indie game that they're making, or their independent short film, or whatever it is that they're looking for content for. You can find a whole array of different things that people have digitally created, whether that is special effects, sequences or layering and filters, whether it's music, whether it's sound effects, whatever those things might be, and people can come and they can license those things. But there are people who make their entire living nowadays off these types of sites just by creating a good library of content and being known for a particular thing. They're creating their own independent brand, they're creating their own independent business within these ecosystems and being known for coming to Pond 5 for that particular thing. And people like Marvel are using people from Pond 5 for some of these aspects, for some of these special effects things, for example, because they're as good as what they would go out and do if they went and they hired a studio to do that, whether that's, using 4K cameras to go and shoot a particular thing or creating a visual effect. They're as well to get that from somewhere like Pond 5 as they are to necessarily go out and hire a particular studio to do that. So, yeah.
From the developer's perspective in the studio.
It's also like, it's been true for a number of years, production or library music has become way more important in games, TV, advertising, because the quality has grown quite significantly, and also the ease of licensing is significantly easier. So lots of composers I know who are very good composers, they also do tracks for libraries because it's actually a revenue stream for them. It's easy for licensors to use. So if you ever spend any time listening to library music, you'll soon start hearing it on TV a lot and thinking, oh yeah, that's that track from that company. And the quality is really, really good. And the price is really, really good. So you end up sometimes having that conversation with owners of music that they want quite a lot of money for their track. And quite rightly, you know, they've invested their time getting there. But I end up having conversations internally and other people in my position with, well, that's only that much. Why are we going for this? But you're getting exactly what Paulina was saying. You're getting that reach of that band, that reach of that artist, that ready-made audience. But sometimes that's not what you want. You want the game or the title to sort of lead the audience, not the music.
So, John, from the composer's perspective, when we're talking about Pond 5 and other kinds of music, I mean, was once a tension there about writing music libraries versus writing music, in the same way that there was a tension about writing for games and writing music in general. How do you view libraries?
I can keep this really short because I think, Martin, what you said is exactly right. Most composers are looking for other revenue streams.
Right.
So all of these things are all good. I think the danger from a composer's point of view is that you can invest a lot of time speculatively populating, library music with your stuff and maybe not get a lot for it. But on the other hand, I certainly know people who easily make as much as they do from commission music as they, you know what I'm trying to say. They make the same, if not more, from library music and Pond 5 and stuff like that as from commissioned music. And let's face it, realistically, without being a downer, there's a lot of people want to do commissioned music, right? I mean, a lot. So, and there's lots of great people out there. So it's very competitive, and there's not that much to go around. So I think, and then you add in all this other stuff. So you have to be everywhere, I think, as a composer. So
is writing music for games becoming less lucrative then? Is it starting to fall off?
Great question. I tell you, but I have to kill you. So it splits. I mean, it splits so obviously, I guess, that at the top end, console games, big titles for Sony, Microsoft, you're going to get paid well. And then, you can go through kind of casual games, middle layer, where maybe there's not such a budget, but you can do good stuff. Maybe not with so much live musicians involved in the recording. And then you come right down to, like the mobile phone title where somebody wants a looping tune, an intro motif, and a few sound effects for 200 quid or something, So, I mean, it really is, that everything's out there. And clearly, I think Paulina was saying later on, I think it's right that there are less opportunities at that high end. I think would it be fair to say there's less of those really, really big games getting made? So that middle ground is the kind of is the one to head for. So in terms of the original question was, is it lucrative?
More or less lucrative, yes.
Yeah. Wow. I'm sorry, I really haven't got a definitive answer for that.
So go ahead.
I was going to say it's kind of quite hard to say, because if you're working on a AAA title and you're asked to do 300 minutes worth of music, you're going to get quite a good amount of money. Whereas if you're going to do a 3-minute track as one of 6 or 7 composers, you're going to get a lot less. And to some extent, once you've done a 300-minute kind of AAA title, then when an advertising company wants you or a film company wants you, your price goes up. It's kind of
Yeah. But what I would say is this as well, is that it's not necessarily about whether or not music for games is less lucrative, but looking at what the future is for entertainment as a whole, which leads to the point of, it's great to write a piece of music for game, but if that game happens to be part of a franchise, and that franchise happens to be across film and TV and all these other places where actually your music is going to get used, suddenly, that one job is far more lucrative than it might have been if you were just thinking about it in the context of game.
And if you're approaching that as a composer, you're now not only talking about composing for film and composing for, say, a AAA franchise, but also possibly composing for casual games too, across the top of that.
You're thinking about the entirety of that franchise in all its guises and forms, so that could even end up being interactive comic at some point in time, who knows? I mean, you're talking about everywhere where that franchise is going to live, so look at a Hunger Games or a Divergent and look at the many different platforms upon which that exists, and there are many of them.
Yeah, great points. And from a composer's point of view, just keep this really quick, you just got to keep your wits about you and be careful about that, because the games industry, there is still this latent thing that of buyouts. And, there are lots of good or reasonable historic reasons for that. But it is problematic for composers in this brave new world that you're talking about. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it absolutely is something that, from a composer's point of view, you have to be very, very aware of. And I mean, those kind of opportunities can make all the difference. So I want to ask, will you be my manager?
We'll talk later.
So let's talk a little bit about management and agents and representation. How is that working in the games industry now for composers? And what is the perspective, both from the point of view of the buyer and the point of view of the seller?
We use kind of composers direct via agents. We go to recording artists. We try and find someone who's got the musical style that fits our product. We're not we don't necessarily need to hire someone that's done a game before, because they might have the skill set to do a game, but they've never had the opportunity. So we work with a wide range. I mean, to sort of touch briefly on John's point, it's a very good point. The rub is, I always want to make any deal I do as good for the company I work for, but also as reasonable for the composer. It's not a good place to be, and I think it's repeat business to some extent. It's you get your name for doing something good for one games company, you'll get other gigs and other work with the same games company. And it's happened with us. We've used quite a few composers many times because they've proved themselves to be good. So it's we're constantly working with people, and we're always looking for new people.
Right. So always looking for new people, but yet wanting to work with some of the same people as before. And there's the aspect of in-housing, and there's the aspect of all the skill set that needs to be had. Is it getting tougher and tougher for people to start doing this kind of work?
For me, some of the reasons why we use the same people is because they musically still fit the project. So we're not just going to use them because we know them. Musically fit the project. The project's got a very tight deadline. It's maybe complex, so you need someone that kind of knows what they're doing, and it's a safe pair of hands, and you can get it done. So there's an expediency. On a longer lead project, we've used people that have no idea and often have to come into the studio and be shown how to put things into the stem format that we want, or explained. And we spend a lot of time talking to people before we have a project, so that we know that they can understand the project, can work on it when we have the right project for them.
You had a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it depends a lot on what type of studio you want to work with. You're talking about long lead times and being able to give people that kind of gentle incline introduction into, being able to do that. But then a lot of the time with the smaller independents, it is a case of you need to hit that ground running. And if you can't, then we need to pass over you and find somebody that has those skill sets so that we can get this thing done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But the other point I was going to make was just touching on what Martin was saying earlier, is that one of the things to remember about the games industry, more so than the film industry, is that we love doing franchises. We love doing sequels and prequels and anything with the equals at the end of it. So actually, if you begin to understand the types of music that we're looking for, that fits within the context of these sequels or prequels, then you're in a pretty good place to start off with, because there's actually an awful lot of those. Some of those franchises have lasted for an awfully long time, and if you can get yourself into that particular genre and mindset, then you will at least have a lot of work coming your way at some point.
Now, I'm aware that we're beginning to run out of time, and I'd like to leave time for people to ask questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to put y'all on the spot really badly right now. And we'll start on that end to be nice to us over here. Could you just do a quick wrap up and talk about a little bit about where you see things going, and that between games and music, and that can be technically, that can be business-wise, that can be in terms of methods of working, and how you feel, what you feel like the future is going to be for these two. John, do you want to start? No.
Okay, well, I think I'll contribute something on the original music side. I think there is a growing and has been a growing sophistication about the artistic application of music in games. When I started working in games music was the glue, right? Sound effects were so primitive, that the music, rudimentary though it was kind of what held the experience together. And I think there's been a lot of time where people believe that it was just a given that wall-to-wall music was what you did in games. But when you look at The Last of Us, and there's a great example of what Martin was just talking about, where Sony brought in, an amazing film composer, Gustav, can't pronounce his name, and then had Chuck Dad's team in the States work extensively with this composer who probably never played a video game in his life. But they knew his music was emotionally connected and right and resonant for this game. So they worked in a very, high budget, but, a very sophisticated way in terms of how they worked with him and his music. And I think that's a poster child for the use of music in games becoming more and more thoughtful and sophisticated in terms of storytelling and narrative and all of that. Then there's Mario, right, which is a whole different bag. But it's great to see, less wall-to-wall music. And I think that, the other thing I'll just tag on the end of that is, I think what Martin said, just the atmosphere of relationships between the games industry and the music industry is that the music industry knows what a game is, understands it, and gets it. And so I think, I hope that we'll make some great entertainment together.
Terrific. Tanya?
I think we live in an age now where actually anybody with a mobile phone and an access to Wi-Fi has the potential and capability to publish just about anything, whether that's a game, film, whatever it may be. And people who are being creative have probably the advantage when it comes to big AAA studios who can't move as quickly, who take longer to understand and adapt to new trends or new technology. You guys are basically, you're at the forefront. You have everything you need to be ahead of the game. But I do also think that we're at a stage where content-wise, we're going to come to that understanding that gaming-wise, we need music and we need sound. And that's, I think, as we merge further into VR and AR and all these other wonderful kind of new technologies that are coming further down the line, I think we're going to become more and more aware of just how important those things are to us. So, it may have been a kind of a pain point in the past in terms of the relationship between music and games, but I do think that it will become one that becomes much more evident further down the line.
Thank you. Paulina?
Well, I like to look at big sort of cultural shifts and big picture things more on the entertainment spectrum. And I'm really excited about the fact that American Idol is dead. It's one of the defining intellectual property formats of our time, and it's come to an end. And I think I just like disruption. I like new things coming. I like the fact that YouTube is, the preeminent, rising platform, a lot more grown up and professional. But the fact that, you know, young people resonate and relate more to YouTube stars than movie stars, and I think that's really, really exciting and interesting times. And what's, you know, what next year is going to look like, we don't know necessarily. And I also think, yeah, on the VR point, I think about VR and music as a content driver and also a driver of mainstream uptake. You see Facebook is in on VR, Google is doing VR, PlayStation's doing VR, you know, Samsung's doing VR. So everybody's doing it. And I think music is going to be one of the biggest catalysts to make that a mainstream thing that everybody can experience, probably beyond gaming. And not just as a sound effect, but actually experiencing a concert, live event. And, you know, everybody knows how special that can be. So I think that's a really exciting time for technology and music.
Kind of to echo what people have been saying, I think, well, music has massive emotional resonance. That's kind of why we all like it and why we use it in products like games. So I think kind of closer collaboration with not just composed stuff, but also with licensed tracks, with artists themselves. I would like to see more kind of real-time music change in games. So like it changes kind of weekly, monthly, whatever, rather than just a radio station that's static. I think all these things are possible. It's kind of just the right project to sort of do it. And I think that would sort of disrupt, like you were saying, kind of that idea of like, this is how you do something. I think it just takes someone to do a product like that. And I think there'll be a whole swathe of things to follow. VR equally is an interesting thing. I think most people view it as a composed area. I actually think it probably work better with a licensed piece of music. I think because it would add, you know, if Adele's new video was actually a VR experience, it would make a big difference.
Thank you. So continuous evolution seems to be the theme, right at the center of where we're going. I'd like to open it up to questions now. We have time for maybe 2 or 3. Is there someone who, any questions anyone would like to ask? In the front, please. Thanks.
Hello, good evening. My name is Emilio Moreu. I'm building an outsourcing platform to find custom audio. And the thing is, I don't know if you're related with outsourcing platforms like Audio Draft or some other platforms where you can you can make a contest, you know, when you need music for gaming. And I would like to know what's your opinion about outsourcing the music for the games as a contest, so it's open, like worldwide, so everyone have an opportunity to take part on a game, for example.
Thank you. Good question. So outsourcing as a contest, as a competition. Does someone want to address that?
There is actually a platform that does this called Zupa. And that's kind of part of their process. They're working primarily with the film industry right now, but I don't see it being a long time before they leap into games as well. But the purpose is that they will put those up as competitions and work directly with the brand or IP owner to curate the responses.
There's a potential tension in there, and you know, on the one hand, outsourcing as a competition can be a real opportunity for people to break through in a field that's very difficult to break through at the moment. On the other hand, it could be read as you could read it as easily as open software being the exploitation of labor.
Absolutely.
And people's ideas. How?
So on Zupa, everybody does get paid, by the way. Just for the record.
Is that given the potential can of worms that it is, operating at AAA level, is that something that y'all would ever approach?
I doubt it.
Personally,
Right.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I think the main objective for some of these massive franchises is just not to screw it up. You know, if you're doing the next whatever massive, you know, game, the next Uncharted or whatever. And I think also, I don't see any problem with it, by the way. I think it's a great idea, and there are some games it would be perfect for. But where you're looking for, if it's The Last of Us, I think then the audio team, the audio director, want to kind of be much more, selective about who they want, who they think is right.
It's sort of telling a story, and if you're telling a story, it's kind of, you probably have a vision of the visual and the, the audio and music and the whole thing. So that's where I can see it not working. But certain games, I think it would work really well.
The other thing I'd mention as well is with platforms like that and formats like that, you don't have the opportunity to build relationships. And a lot of what this is about relationships, both with the creator of the game and their artistic vision, as well as the creator of the music. And there has to be some form of relationship there in order for that to align. You don't really get that with that kind of format.
Right, indeed. Any other questions anyone would like to ask? Okay, in which case I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, John, Tanya, Paulina, and Martin. Thank you very much. Terrific session. Thanks, yeah.